Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to my studio. This afternoon I'm going to be painting a portrait of, well, it's a portrait of a street scene. So using any photographs that you might have handy or photographs that you may have taken in the past, we're going to have a look at how we can create a watercolour, pen and pencil drawing. So beginning with pencil work. So I'm just going to start off by using, I've got an ordinary HB pencil here that I'm working with, and I'm going to be working with pen but not yet. I have a selection of various watercolours with me on my table. So I'm hoping, I'm just going to swivel you round and hopefully we're going to be the right way round with any luck. So hands this way. So I'm just waiting for the thumbs up to see if we're the right way round now. Okay, so just grabbing your pencil, you're going to be looking at your original drawing to see what we're working with. So the first thing I do, excuse me while I clear my throat, the first thing I do is I'm plotting. So I'm plotting, where are these lines going to go to begin with? Where's everything going to go when we start off the work? So we've got to get these first preliminary things in place. So first off, I'm going to begin by, let's have a look. I'm just seeing if I need to turn anything round. Okay, right. How about if I turn things this way? Let's have a look. We're just going to get the swivel again. Okay. Oops. Right, bear with us while we get this right, because the phone is wanting to turn things around and go portrait. So, right, now it is in landscape, it is in portrait, but it's actually, but at least it is the right way round now as you're viewing it. Okay, so now I'm going to begin . Okay, I'm just going to start plotting in the picture now. So I'm just working out where is that building that I'm looking at here. So at the moment I'm looking at this part of it. So where is that? Where does that fit in? So we'll just start to work with that. Okay. Right, so now I'm just getting some of the background into this picture. Okay. So I'm just looking at what can I see in the background of this image. I can see some trees here, so I'm just going to suggest those trees. Okay, so we're seeing, also there's quite a bit of traffic there, isn't there? I can see there's some cars on the road. So I'm looking at whereabouts is this in relation to the road and the car. So this is what we refer to as plotting. So we're sketching very lightly at this point, very, very lightly. So we're not pressing at all hard, because if there are errors at this point, you are able to then go back and change things. So nothing is committed too heavily at this point. So I'm seeing some buildings here on this side, and I want to just get those in a little bit more. What I'm going to do is bring my picture down and put it next to the drawing I'm doing, and just checking to see whether I've got everything where it needs to be. So that's looking quite good. As far as composition goes, I'm quite happy with that right now. So we've got some path here. We've got a pavement. We've got a lamppost. We've got traffic lights. So I'd like to make sure I get these into the right places. So I'm measuring all the time. I'm looking at my original drawing and I'm measuring, are things in the right places? Let's have a look. Let's check now while the picture's in its early stages. So I'm thinking these flats possibly aren't in the right place. I may alter that now. I've still got time. So I'll check again. Yeah, that's come out a little bit too far. So this is when it's really handy to have a rubber. Let's make those adjustments now. You might be working, looking out of your window. You may not have a photograph that you're working from. Everybody will have their own things that they're working with. So that's the beauty of this. You'll have your own photographs, I imagine. They might be holiday photos you're using. They could be photographs from when you were walking around your area recently, maybe on one of your daily walks. I know I take quite a few pictures at the moment when I'm on my daily walks, because we often just go out for no more than an hour these days. So it's really nice if I can take one or two photographs. What I'm doing now is I'm just sketching in very lightly some trees in the background. So I've got my traffic lights there. So this part is going to be very light. I'm going to show you how to create the illusion of lights on with watercolour. Then we've got a tree that's sort of somewhere between the flats and the traffic lights, isn't it? So that tree's sort of coming up between these. Sometimes I like to use one of these pencils just to suggest trees, and I just use the edge of the pencil. It's a technique that you might find you might want to have a try of this. So you just use the edge rather than the tip of the pencil. So I'm just doing the branches. Where I can see branches, I will just suggest them with this edge of the pencil. Just working quite softly still. You're not putting great pressure on. I am just starting to enhance certain areas of my drawing now. So that's the branches on this tree over here. So I'm just suggesting those with the pencil just now. Then I'm going to get these roofs of this building in. Got a little chimney there. I don't want to come too far. I may have just checking my lines there. So we've got some background trees over here. So I'm just going to just shade those lightly. It was a very rainy day. This was in October, the photograph I'm working from. So the atmosphere was very different to the weather that we have now. But what I'm going to do is try and create atmosphere by just using some watercolours and some pen. So this is all the preliminary drawing that's happening at this point. Just making sure I've got everything there in the background. So there's a few cars I can see here, and then there's one or two people. There's people with umbrellas walking along. But I'm not going into great detail. They're really just light sketches at this point. So this pavement is a really nice sweep that comes right the way round here. So I want to be able to capture that. Then we've got the crossing point. Then we've got some shadow underneath the car. So these are all the points of the picture that are going to be important for me to work with as the drawing develops. So just light sketching at this point. So right now I'm quite happy with that as it stands. I feel as though maybe I could just get a little bit more detail into the flats over here to one side. So there are some nice verticals here that I want to just get into position. I'm just looking at where they are. Where are those lines going to go? So there's some windows here, some curtains here. I can just see some of them don't have curtains. So there's going to be some dark spaces in some of these window areas. But I don't want to go too heavy with my pencil, so I'm just going to rub out some of the marks I don't need. So looking at that now, I've got most of the things I need are in place now. So I'm quite happy with that as an overall composition. So I'm now going to begin with a little bit of colour. So all I've got is some very neutral, I'll just show you my palette here. I've got some quite neutral colours, some greys, some darks, this is a nice neutral grey, this one. So these are standard, I think they're Winsor & Newton, these colours. They're really nice. This is a lovely colour. It's a really nice neutral grey, which I tend to use quite a lot for, instead of jet black, it sometimes works really nicely. So I'm just going to begin applying some of this. Is very shadowy over here, but I don't want to go too heavy with that. So I'm just suggesting some shady areas here and there. Then I can see some grey on these roofs. So I'm going to just begin adding these colours here and there. Not too much, don't go too heavy, because at this point we're still just in a sketching phase. So I've got some colour on the pavement, there's some greys over here. There's also some warm reflected light, so I'm just adding a little bit of, if you've got some watercolours and you've got some yellows and greens in your palette, then this is where I'd like you to just mix them with some neutral colours. If you've got black watercolour, then that's great. Just mix it with a little bit of, say, any sort of ochres or sienna colours. That's what I'm doing right now. So I'll just show you my palette again. I've got some sort of slightly warmer shadow colours going on now. But I'm going to need those for much of this foreground reflection. So I'm just going to start to get those in. I want some slightly warmer tones, I think, here. I don't want it all too cold. So this is the foreground. But then we want some definition, maybe where that pavement's just curling around there. Now this brush is quite a simple, basic shape brush, so this is a really good one for just getting that kind of detail in, but it's also got a fine point to it, if you can see that. And that's really useful when you do want to go in with a bit more detail. It's a very good versatile brush, and it was just a basic Daler Rowney filbert brush. And you'll find that that kind of brush will be incredibly useful for this sort of quick sketching style work that you might do. So I'm just getting there's quite a bit of shadow area over here in this part of the painting. This tree, I'm going to begin introducing some of the branches using the brush now. So going over some of those marks I made with pencil, I'm now going to go over them with a brush. We're even going to go into that further a little bit later with the pen when we want the really fine areas of the building. So I'm also going to just work on the edge of those apartments there to one side. Now I want some really sort of faint ochre colours there, not too much colour. It's almost a monochrome, but not quite, this photograph. It's got little bits of colour, but not a lot. So that's all I'm wanting to suggest, really. So these are some of the points of reference all in place now within the picture. So if you're doing something similar at home, you'll find that, have you got many of your verticals in place? Have you got your horizontals in place to be following? I'm just sketching in some of these finer branches, and then I'm going to go over to these far background trees and just suggest a little bit of density there in the background. So you can just see where my brush will start working all over the paper now. So I won't be focusing on any one position. I'll be moving around the page quite a lot now. But I do want to be careful where there's going to be lights. For example, the lights on the cars. I need to leave those spaces as white as possible, because you'll see what I mean when I start. So only pick out areas that are darker, leave the light areas right until the last minute, because there's a reason for that, because you want those to really shine. You want those lights to really jump out at you from the page. So at the moment I'm not layering up too much colour, just bits and pieces. I'm going a bit darker now. So I'm just bringing in a little bit of what I think this is Payne's Grey. So this is just giving me a little bit more depth. So we've got, overlaying the colours that I already had on there before. So I'm just building up now. I might switch and go for a slightly bigger brush, because I just want to blend that in now. So I just want to, I'm just using a goat hair brush now. Now I realise you may not have all of these brushes at home, but it might inspire you to go out and get a goat's hair brush to work with. They're really nice. So you can get, it's sort of almost a bigger brush, so you can kind of get a little bit more happening with the paint with this kind of a brush. I'm going back into this background area again, over here, back over to these buildings. You'll find you'll be jumping around a bit, just making sure everything is tonally quite even. So I'm just going to leave quite a lot of these central areas. As you can see in the photograph, there are quite a lot of light areas within the centre of this picture. So it's important to leave those until we really need to fill them in. Okay, so back to the smaller brush again now, the finer brush. Some more, maybe some more trunk area on that tree. Also, I'm going to work on what I think is maybe like a street light or something similar over here in this part of the picture. Then I've got traffic lights here. I'm just suggesting the edge of the traffic lights. There's buildings behind there as well, but we can't see too much of those. I'm just going to get a little bit of tissue and just dab away. I don't want that to be too strong at this point. So that's better. That's in a better position. So now we've got some fine trees in the background. There are some greens in this picture, so I don't want to forget about those green tones. So as it was late in the last year in October, there was a little bit of green left, but there were autumn leaves as well. So I want some of those darker neutral greens in that background, but not too much. So at the moment, I'm just dabbing on and dabbing off to just suggest very far distant detail, but not too much at this point. Right, so in these gardens, there is some foliage going on in here and some things happening here. I'm just going to move that back into the middle a little bit further so you can see better. That's better. Right, so back to the verticals here, and a little bit more ochre. So looking at the time, we've got about 18, just over 18 minutes left. So in that time, we'll be able to really focus on some of the detail that we can bring in with our pen next, but not quite. I would say I'm just going to add a little bit more to the background first, before I do that. Now that's probably, that colour's a bit warmer than I wanted it to be. I might cool that down a bit in a minute. Bring some colder colours back in to fix that. That's it. So that's another car there off to the left, my left of the picture. And then I've got a bit more detail to work on over on this side, and this pavement. And there's a little bit of detail underneath those parked cars over there. Also, I think that should be darker around this part of the picture, so I'll come back to that in a minute. So I'll just let that area dry and go back to this car in the middle. Now there are some really nice reflections just underneath that car, just coming down from the headlights. So the way I'm going to suggest that is, again, I want a slightly bigger brush, but I just want to suggest reflections rather than do too much, and then it's really hard to go back. Once you've applied too much watercolour, it's hard to remove it again. So I'm just looking at what colours can I see on the pavement, what kind of greys. There's quite a lot of different colours, aren't there? I don't know what you're finding, whether the colours are the same. You might be picking up different colours depending on your monitor. So I'm just getting this darker colour over this side. It is a lot darker on this side of the picture because there is shadows created by the building. I also want to get some of the darker areas of the building in position now, so it looks more realistic, and maybe a few more dark tree branches. And then there's the edge of a wall over here. There's the base of that tree, and there's a wall that kind of comes around that corner. So let's see if we can get that in. So there's some shadows coming down from the building on this side of the pavement. So I'm just suggesting those shadows. Now, back over here to these vehicles. This looks like a standing taxi I can see over here. So it's just there, hovering by the side of the road with its light on top. So I'm going to come back to that light. These lights can be added later, as can the details that I'll be adding into it. So this is just the suggestion of a leafless tree towards the back of the picture. Here I want to start getting some of my branches in on this foreground tree. These are quite dark, these branches. I'm just going to suggest, so I don't want to go too heavy with these at this point. I can come back to those in a minute. So there's still quite a lot of density over here, quite dark over on this side of the picture. And then a little bit more detail. We've got a few houses. Now, there's some red brick on these buildings, so I do want to suggest that. So all I'm going to do is just add a little bit here and there. And then it looks like we've got things. Now, there was a little bit too much depth there, so I want to take that back a bit. Now, having tissues handy is really useful. I know toilet paper is quite scarce currently, maybe not so much now. Well, I think we've all got plenty now, haven't we? I certainly didn't stockpile any. I know some people did. But yeah, if you've got tissues handy, then it's really useful, because you might find, oh, that's gone a bit heavy there. I'll go back to that part. I'll just remove a little bit of that. And you can. It's really easy to do that with watercolour. It's so flexible. So I'm coming back to this area again. Just some areas need to be really picked out now with shadows. So in our last, we've got 13 minutes that I have to really get my detail in. But so now I'm just going back over little areas that I can see just need a little bit more work. They need more definition. So normally I would do this maybe leaving a bigger gap for the watercolours to dry, but what I'm going to do today is slightly different. In a moment, when I'm happy with most of the watercolour marks that I've made, I'm going to then get my pen and I'm going to begin getting a few of the branch details and some of the fine things that you can see going on within the picture. I'll start working on those next. So my next step is to think about where can I see, in my photograph, I can see the lights from traffic lights. Now I'd like to have a little go at getting some of those in place now. So I want a really nice bright red watercolour, and I'm just going to indicate where I can see those lights, but I don't want it to be too heavy, so I'm just going to keep the paint transparent. I'm just taking a tissue with a little bit of water and I'm dabbing away, so it's a case of adding and removing as you go along till you get something that you're happy with. And some of it is really instinctual. You just apply something and you think, oh, I think I'm going to step back a bit, and just take that back. So you grab the tissue and you go backwards and forwards with application. So that's the way I like to work with my watercolours. So I've got my traffic lights in there. Now, how about those lights on the cars? So I think I'm going to start to need some yellow. It's quite a sort of a lemony, bright yellow, reflecting in the road and from the cars. So I'm going to start applying that now. Again, backwards and forwards. So you put some down and you take some off. Okay, so you really just want hints of it. You don't want to be smothering the paper with yellow. So you just want little bits of yellow here and there. So this will start to give the impression that there was reflection on the roads, on the road in the rain. I think this needs a little bit more shadow between the headlights there and there. So it's just starting to look more realistic, but it's not quite there yet. So in the 10 minutes that I have left, I will be able to really pull this together now, so it looks like more of a finished picture. I think this building needs a little bit more tone. So now we're just starting to, in a very instinctual way, go back across the picture, looking for areas that just are lacking depth. And just picking things out here and there. So there might be something interesting going on there in that garden. We'll go back to that bit. Bring the definition back again on this street post. Maybe some more windows. Need a bit more detail. So maybe back over to this side. I think this needs a little bit more work on this side. So you might find your eye will be going across this picture again and again until you feel quite satisfied that you're covering all the areas and you are giving the impression that there are reflections, there are buildings, there's shadows, and there's a bit of shadow under that car. But there's also lights reflected on this car, so I need to try and work out, how do I convey that? It's about what you leave behind sometimes with a watercolour drawing like this. So this needs a little bit more definition. So I'm going to start to do a little bit of work with the pen. So I'm going to start suggesting leaves on the trees. All I've got is a fine liner pen. So it's quite a nice one, you know, just a standard, it's like needlepoint uniball it's called. So, but that's going to give me, I'm going to work with that to get some of these trees and these leftover leaves from autumn in place. So this is going to start to give my picture some really nice little details that'll just jump out and give it a bit more depth. It needs that definition, I think, and especially on those finer branches that I've got within the image. So now just picking out some of that detail that I had there before. some of it gets lost, but you bring it back again. So this is the nice thing about being able to draw into it. The paper I'm using is quite thick and fairly sturdy. So if you are going to try out more of these, then maybe go for a slightly heavier paper so you can work into it a little bit more. So this is my pavement detail. I'm just going to get a little bit of water on my brush just to blend that in. See, the darker I'm making these areas, the lighter the reflections are now appearing. So I'm just going for a bit of definition on the car, back to this car again, and maybe over to this car. There's two parked cars there on that side. I'm just going to pop some windows in over this side, and then I'm just going to carefully, I just want to just suggest some of these branches, these tree branches here, but not, I don't want to go crazy with it, but it's just giving the impression so that they look like they're organic against the rest of the background. And over on this side, there is quite a lot of branches to just get those to appear. I'm just using the tip of the brush and just stippling like this. So it just gives the impression. You can then use the tissue to dab it a little bit, and then it softens it all down a bit. So that's quite a nice technique to try. So you're just applying a little bit here and there. Then maybe bringing out those branches. So we're in our last 5 minutes, so I'm just seeing how much I can add into it now to really make that work. But what needs to happen here? Just a little bit more shadow. You see, as the paint dries, it sometimes dries a little bit lighter, so you might want to just go back into it a little bit to just help pick out those details that you want. There's somebody standing there at the crossing, so I'm gonna paint them in now. Somebody waiting to cross the road there. Right, so just a bit more detail so we know that these are cars. So I just want to make them look a little bit more realistic. Right, so a few more details on the trees. So I'm just going to dab that a little bit. So just using a slightly bigger brush with a little bit of water, you can just kind of smoosh that up a little bit like that, just to make it look more realistic. Like mess the paint up a little bit, and like where you've had the ink from the pen. That'll just help it to sort of give it a slightly more realistic look. Now, something else I want to do is the sky is not a white sky because it's so rainy, so I'm just going to take a very grey colour. I'm just going to suggest, I don't want too much, very thin down. I'm just going to suggest that it's a grey sky because it's quite an overcast day, so it was actually late afternoon. So that's just using a slightly thicker brush with some water and a little bit of paint, but not too much. So these are all just the last finishing touches on this now. So I'm going to see, do I have enough shadow under here? Do I need to just go back in and do a little bit more? Is there enough shadow in this part of the painting? It's keeping it quite loose. It doesn't have to be overly detailed. But now I want to show that there are lights on the car. So I'm just going around now, just picking out the areas that on the car, so it just shows us that the lights are on. It's just little bits and pieces here and there which will just make this look a little bit more convincing. Just go around that street light a little bit more, around the car light there. Now that I want to look quite subtle really, so I'm just going to drag some water across that. Hardly any water on the brush there, just mostly, hardly any paint, just mostly water. And a bit more shadow over here, I think. So it's just quite dark around this side of the... So there's the taxi with the light on. Just get a little bit more to show that it is a parked car on the side of the road there. So we're just into our last seconds of this demonstration now. So personally, I'm quite happy with that. I'm quite happy with how that's turned out in the time given. Now, I'm hoping that's given you some ideas. And if you didn't have all the materials you needed, well, maybe, you know, you could think about getting some of those in for when you want to do another street scene. So we're just coming up to the end of this, and I want to say thank you very much to everybody for tuning in. And I'm just going to bring it in a little bit closer for the last shots now, so you can have a little bit of a close-up look. And thank you very much, everyone.